All right, it's 7:02. Let's get started. We have a pretty good crowd already. We have 19 attendees. Welcome, everybody. I'm Reggie Nair, part of Southlake Foundation. Who we have here is Mr. Shane Bybee, and let me introduce him to all of you. Mr. Shane Bybee is founder of Bybee College Prep here in Southlake. He has master's degree in educational leadership and has been teaching for 28 years. He has worked with thousands of students teaching everything from remedial 7th grade English language arts to dual credit English 4 and AP language and composition. He has written curriculum, presented topics at the State Convention for English Teachers, and created professional development sessions for school districts. Thank you very much for joining, Mr. Bybee.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Sure. We also have Wissam joining us from the student community. Wissam is an upcoming senior at Carroll Senior High School. He is one of the very active student leaders of our program, and he will be asking questions representing members of student leadership program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right, so as we get started, if any one of the participants have questions, please feel free to type in the questions on chat, and we will take the questions when it's appropriate. All right. Wissam, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Mr. Bybee, on behalf of the students, I'm just going to be asking you some questions. First off, or the ACT, what's the difference between the two tests? And if you take both, how do you compare them and choose which test score to submit? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I think Mr. Bybee is on mute.
Oh,
Thank you so much. I put myself back on mute whenever the introductions were going on, so I didn't interrupt. Sorry about that. Okay, so when it comes to SAT or ACT, there is no advantage to one test over the other as far as college admissions go. Both schools are going to look at the college admissions, the tests themselves the same way. There is an official concordance out there. You can find it if you type in SAT, ACT concordance. You'll find the official document. And it shows what an SAT score theoretically converts to for an ACT and vice versa. Where the colleges are, they don't really have a preference one way or the other for one test. So one of the things we recommend students do is take both tests. Now, a lot of students are coming in with a PSAT already done their sophomore year. And so they can actually look at that PSAT. By the way, would you guys like me to turn my camera on? I'm happy to do so if you'd like me to.
Yes, you can now.
Okay, absolutely. Saying I'm still blocked.
Is it? Oh, give me a minute.
All right. Take one of each and then compare the two scores using that concordance to see if there is a notable advantage. What we see happens most of the time, the two scores are effectively the same. And in that situation, go with whichever test you were more comfortable with, whichever one you liked better. One warning I would say, particularly for students at Carroll, where they're giving the pre-ACT. The pre-ACT has some problems for a number of reasons. One of the problems with it is most students, they take it their freshman year, and it can be difficult to gauge a comparison of that pre-ACT to what the comparable SAT score would be, largely because you're 14 when you take it, and then you're taking the actual PSAT a year later. So it can be tough. It's always good to retake an ACT. I recommend students do it in summer. Now, I'm very careful about this. One of the pieces of advice students sometimes get that I think is wrong is that they're told, well, just go take one of each, like official tests. Well, you don't need to do that. You can go online not making a plug. We offer them free in our office every weekend during the summer, during the week during the summers. You can come take an actual, an officially released test. It's not going to be an official test score. It's not going to show up on your record anywhere, but you can come in our office. You can go online and get an official ACT, lots of different places online. Take that test and then see how that score compares to your PSAT. If they're about the same, decide which test you like better. If they are, if the ACT is notably lower, then start off with the SAT. Everything we show students to do on an SAT, on how to get better on an SAT, will help on an ACT. It just doesn't cover everything that's on the ACT. So if your ACT score ends up being significantly higher, then you start with an ACT. That's a good thing to know. You really do have to focus on some mathematical concepts that are on the ACT that are not on the SAT. You also have to concentrate on the science section on the ACT, which doesn't happen on the SAT. One other note now, I'm going to make one follow-up comment to that. Before I get to that, I want to say another thing about the differences in the two tests, because I think that was another part of the question, is what are the differences in the two tests? For me, the biggest difference between the two tests is really in the amount of time you have. If you want to jot something down on the SAT, as it is currently structured, and this is true for students class of 2024 and class of 2023, the SAT is 180 minutes to answer 154 questions. The ACT is 175 minutes to answer 215 questions. So the ACT is 5 minutes shorter and has 60 more questions stacked into it. So that's a lot to cover in that time period. That's really the thing that students find the most difficult about the ACT, is answering all of the questions in the time period allowed. It's not as difficult. The reading questions on the ACT are actually somewhat easier than the reading questions on the SAT, significantly so. The grammar section is very much, the English section on the ACT is very much like the writing section on the SAT. And the math on the ACT, some students like it better because you can use your calculator for the entire math section on the ACT. The biggest problem is getting everything answered. So if you're shooting for that 34, 35 top score on the ACT, it can be tough just because you have to go at such a high rate of speed. The reason I put a provision on that is because there is a major change coming for the class of 2025. For the class of 2025, the SAT is going to change dramatically. The College Board announced just a few weeks ago that the SAT starting in the spring of 2023, starting in the fall of 2023. So 1 year from now, the PSAT that year will be given entirely digitally. It'll all be online, just like the STAR test that students do today. It'll be the same basic functionality as the STAR test. So it's not going to be something new to students particularly, but it is going to be a new way of doing the PSAT. So in fall of 23, College Board is going to change how they do it. And then in the spring of 24, the SAT will only be offered online for the spring of 24. So that can change some strategies. My recommendation to students is don't make 2024 first you're going to take, because that one's still going to be kind of a guinea pig test. I think they will have worked out all of the kinks. I think they will have figured out how to make that test work. But the March of 2024 is a test with several, like 500,000 students traditionally take that test, that particular administration. So that's going to be a stress test for it. If that's your first test date, my recommendation is prepare for the ACT that year. Let the system work the kinks out, and then think about the May or the June SAT if you decide you want to go to the SAT instead. One other thing about that new SAT is that they are getting rid of the concordance. College Board will no longer honor the concordance, and they have no plans to produce a new concordance to show an equivalent ACT score. So for the class of 2025, the idea that you have a score that can convert from one to the other may change a little bit, and how schools convert those scores from one to the other may change a little bit, because the class of 2025 is going to be the one that experiences these dramatic changes in how the SAT is going to be offered. ACT has plans to offer a digital test within the next 2 years. However, they are adamant that even when they offer a new digital test, they will have a pencil and paper option available to students if they want to use pencil and paper. There we go.
All right. Thank you. We can see you now.
I tried to get it going a couple of times while I was talking there, but I couldn't get it to pop up.
No problem at all. All right. Getting to the second question, it is related to the first one. There's a recent trend of several universities not needing the test scores now, right? With that, what is your guidance on the ACT, SAT value in front of colleges versus GPA or anything else?
So there has been, since COVID happened in 2020, a lot of schools have come out and said things like, we are test optional. So let's parse through what that means a little bit. If you read those statements carefully, the University of Maryland system just last week made a very common statement that the test scores will no longer be required as a part of the college admissions. And that required is the technical word there. They're not saying we don't want them. And in fact, most college admissions officers will tell you that if your test scores help your application, send in your test scores. If you feel like they don't help your application, don't send them in. The only major university system that has truly gone test blind, which has said, we don't want your test scores, like they've adamantly said, we do not want your test scores, is the University of California system that has system-wide said that test scores will not be a part of our college admissions. So you have to pay attention, is the school saying the test score is not required, or is the school saying they are not needed, they are not wanted as a part of the application? The interesting catch on the University of California system is that while they're not a part of the application process and the admissions process, they are still a part of the class selection process. And in order to take freshman English, this is just one example of it, to take freshman English at UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, and I think UC San Diego, those 4 schools, you do have to have a minimum 30 on the ACT. They didn't put a minimum SAT score, but a comparable SAT score would be a 1360. If you do not have a 30 ACT or a 1360 SAT, you will not be allowed to enroll in freshman English in the UC system. Now that's current as of a few months ago. It's probably been 3 or 4 months since I checked their website making that statement, but that's a little known fact. Another interesting development in this process of test scores are no longer required, you're more than a number. Wellesley University, and I don't know that you would find a more progressive, we love everyone is fantastic place than Wellesley University. And Wellesley came out and said, we do not require test scores. If you feel like, same thing, the students who applied to Wellesley this last year, if you submitted your test score, you were admitted 180% more frequently than if you did not submit test scores. Boston University, same situation, same neighborhood. Students who submitted test scores to Boston University were admitted 220% more frequently. So they were admitted 3.2 times more frequently than students who did not submit test scores. That's how I messed up, that they were 2.2 times more frequently than students who did not submit test scores. So you have a lot of universities that are telling schools, you don't need telling students, you don't need test scores, we want you to apply. The reason they're telling students that they don't need to submit test scores is because they saw what happened, and you've seen it too. Over the last 2 years, we have seen the number of applications shoot up because Everyone's mom says you're awesome, and I'll get in even though my test scores are terrible because I've got a 4.0 GPA. Well, you know who else has a 4.0 GPA? Everybody else applying to that school. So those really selective schools. You may have seen the headline a few months ago, back in February or so, that Harvard was no longer going to continue to not require test scores through the class of 2025. But the reason for that has very little to do with Harvard's pursuit of equity and a lot more to do with the fact that if Harvard reinstates test scores, the next admission cycle, Harvard's applications will drop. They will get significantly fewer applications. And one of the great benefits that Harvard has had, because it doesn't matter how many students apply to Harvard, Harvard is going to admit about 2,200 kids. If 40,000 students apply, they're going to admit 2,200. If 50,000 students apply, they're going to admit 2,200 kids. Doesn't matter. And so if Harvard suddenly drops, if the applications they're getting drops, 10,000 applications, well, now their percentage goes up. And the headline the next day is not going to be about how Harvard's percentage went up, but it doesn't really matter. The headline the next day is going to be Harvard admits a higher percentage of students for the first time in years, or admits its highest percentage of students for the first time in years. And this great scarcity mythos that Harvard has created around itself is going to be penetrated slightly. And Harvard doesn't want to risk that. Harvard doesn't. So all of these really selective schools that have that 7, 8, 9% acceptance rate, they don't want to take the chance of getting fewer applications in, because that's going to make it look like a seat at their university is not as competitive when it still is. Another detail I'll give that's kind of my proof for that is Texas A&M and the University of Texas did this big speech to a bunch of college consultants a while back, talking about what an awesome, diverse class of applicants they've had. And again, note the words carefully. They had a diverse class of applicants. The data they haven't shared is what is the class of admissions looking like? What is it demographically? What does that look? And then one step further than that, if test optional has been this fantastic opener of equity, right? If it's done all these wonderful things, well, then let us know, like Boston University and Wellesley did, what percentage of students you admitted submitted test scores and what percentage of students you admitted did not. And they haven't released that information. And they haven't released that information because they know there's people like me out there that can do math, and they can work backwards from, well, if that's the case, if this percentage applied without test scores and this percentage was admitted, then what's the comparison? And we can break that data down. And I don't think it works favorably for them. The universities still prefer if you have a test score. And if you submit your application without a test score, the remainder of your application better be extremely good, top notch everywhere. We are in a society where over 50% of high school graduates graduate with an A average. So over 50%, if you've got your 3.7, it's awesome. You have worked hard to earn that 3.7, but you are in a situation where a 3.7 is considered the norm and not unusual when it comes to applying to colleges. The last thing I'll say, back to Texas A&M using a state flagship university, is I sat in a presentation with their Tarrant County admissions representative back in October, when she told this crowd full of parents and students that if you do not have a 1300, you should apply test optional. If you do not have a 1300 SAT, you should, that's a quote. Let's talk about what that means. It means two things. Somewhere in A&M system is if you come into their system, you don't have a 1300, you're going into a different pile. That's affecting your application in some way. It's also saying that if you apply to A&M test optional, they are assuming your score is below a 1300. So if you have a 1300 or above, doesn't matter, you should submit that 1300. I'll share something with you on the screen. I've pulled up a couple of things. These are different slides from presentations that I've done over the years, this is probably one of the slides that's been the most popular. Let me pull it up. This is a statement from the state of college admissions from 2019. And the reason it's from 2019 is they have not released a more recent one. But this is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors in 2019. I wanted you guys to see this because I want you to see that the first 3 factors in your admissions process are grades. Great. Factor number 1 is grades in all courses by a long way. They want to see that you've developed that work ethic that makes certain that your grades are good. That's critical. Then they're going to look at your grades in college prep classes. What were your grades really in your core classes? Math, science, social studies, English, and foreign language. What classes did you tend to take? Were you taking AP or on-level classes? Also, what classes were available for you to take? Could you take could you take a lot of AP classes, or did your school only offer a few? But then you see, this is in 2019, pre-COVID, that admission test scores are the 4th thing on that list. Now, I expect to see this drop down a little bit, but we have no idea how much it's going to drop when it does come down. So, as for the initial question, I wanted to give you some data that I had on that. But as for the initial question of, do you have to take the test or not? If you can get a test score that helps your application, it helps your application tremendously. If your test score does not, then there is a way for you to apply without a test score, but you need to make certain that everything else on your application is absolutely superlative. So that's not me advocating for the test scores or not. If the tests evaporated tomorrow, I would spend my time helping students get college applications put together and be absolutely happy in doing that. But the fact is, as the Dean of Admissions at Trinity told me in my podcast, he said, look, a student with a 4.0 and a 1450, I know what that student can do. A student who just turns in a 4.0, I'm not quite as sure.
Mm-hmm.
So a good test score gives them good data.
Got it.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Bybee. So how early into high school should students start thinking about college and start preparing for the SAT and ACT? And when is the best time to start preparing for the whole college admissions process?
Man, I love that question. That's a great question, because so often I see students who start taking classes for the SAT and ACT well before they'll take prep classes for the tests well before they've taken the academic classes that'll support the test. As far as the SAT and ACT go, that planning, that actual prep does not need to start until the student has completed all or most of Algebra 2. That's our litmus test. So a student who has completed Algebra 2, I'm going to try to pull up a slide that I have prepared to that real quick. Once you've completed Algebra 2, if you've completed Algebra 2 your sophomore year or before, then my recommendation is that you, here it is. Give me 1 second and I'll share this with you. Is that coming up? It's not coming up, is it? No, it's not.
Not yet.
There it is. Okay. So when do you take Algebra 2? If you take Algebra 2 your sophomore year or before, plan on taking the SAT or the ACT in the fall of your junior year. If you take Algebra 2 year or will then take spring of your junior year. You need that foundation. The math section on both tests is about 2/3 Algebra 2 or higher. So you need that math, that foundation of Algebra 2. What that looks like, so the test dates themselves, I'm gonna skip through this real quick. The test dates themselves the national tests are on very predictable dates. The SAT, there's always an SAT on the last weekend of August. There's always an SAT on the first weekend of October. The only date that really kind of moves around on this is the April ACT because it's dependent on when the Easter holiday is going to be. They'll move it around to accommodate Easter holiday. So last year it was on like April 2nd, and next year it's on April 12th or something like that. So those move around a little bit, but you can find that and you can plan. In my perfect world, juniors who have already finished Algebra 2, juniors who had Algebra 2 their sophomore year or before, should plan on taking the SAT in October/December. So take your first one, because you're going to probably take two or three tests. You may have seen that bullet point on a previous slide. So plan on the SAT October or December of your junior year, or the ACT December and February of your junior year. I really, most of the time for juniors, I know there's an August SAT available. I know there's a September and October ACT available, but really for juniors and seniors, especially with the August SAT, really for juniors, I should say, especially with the August SAT and the September ACT, you need to start preparing for those during the summer. And that's what gets tricky about preparing for the tests. Let me talk in a second about how to prepare for the tests. Your junior year or later, if you're taking Algebra 2 your junior year or later, then for the SAT, plan on a March-June combination. For the ACT, an April-June combination. Those are the combinations we recommend when we're working with students. When you know what your test date is, then give yourself 6 to 8 weeks before the test date to really start focusing on that particular test. So we do it time and time again with students. 8 weeks is plenty, because what you need to do when it comes to test prep, you're not trying to learn a whole lot of new concepts. There are no concepts on those tests that you haven't been taught. You know, you have been taught all of those concepts, that you've been familiarized with them. The difference is you have to learn how to apply what you know to those particular questions. Let's take a math class, for example. If your teacher is helping you learn about the quadratic formula, right? They're going to give you a bunch of quadratic equations, and then you're going to go through and solve those quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. That's what it's going to look like. On the SAT, the catch is you have to know, you have to be able to recognize, on this question, I need the quadratic formula. Like, what are the clues that tell me, this is when I use the quadratic formula? You know, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. I could sing it for you if you'd like, but you already know that. What you don't know is when to apply it. What you haven't learned is when to apply it at a time that the teacher hasn't said, hey, you're going to solve all of these using the quadratic formula. That's the difference with the SAT. 8 weeks is plenty. So when we work with a student who's preparing for the October SAT, that's going to start first week of August. If they're preparing for the December ACT, that's going to start in mid-October. That's when you want to do it. The other thing that's critical on whatever prep you're doing, be doing preparation right up to the test date. You know, the football team doesn't practice. And then when they get into the playoffs, be like, okay, we're done. We're not going to practice anymore. We know the plays. We're good. No, they keep practicing. They go over the next opponent. They figure out how they're going to break that down. They keep practicing. They keep their routine. They keep that one. There's a reason for that. And the reason is that that's the repetition you need. So when you do know your test date, plan to prepare specifically on that particular test right up to the test date. Did I answer all of that question?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Bobby. That was perfect.
Okay, following on that, Mr. Bobby, are there any courses that you recommend to be completed? You mentioned Algebra 2 as one of the courses that helps the test, right? Are there other courses that you would recommend that needs to be finished before a student attempts these tests?
Not courses necessarily. Having completed English 2 isn't necessarily going to make the difference on your reading and your writing score. What I would say, the difference I see when I have a student who comes in and has a 3.9 or a 101 GPA, but is really having problems getting above a 1250 or a 1300 SAT, most of the time for that student, when we break down what's happened, that student has learned to do what I call playing school. They've learned what has to happen in the classroom in order to get the grade for that particular class. But they haven't figured out how to actually learn the material. And maybe my best example is what happens in the English class. And this is said as someone who taught English for 22 years. All right. But in English class, students have figured out how to not read a novel, but make it look like they read a novel, or how to get by without reading a particular assignment, but make sure it looks like they've read the assignment. And those of you students in the audience know what I'm talking about. How do you go online? If you hopefully have English third block, then who do you know in second block who had that same teacher first block? So you can go over what was, and it's not just true of English. It's true of, no one wants calculus first block. You don't want calculus first block because that's the first time people are taking the test. You got to take it cold. You want that third block calculus class where you have time to talk to somebody who had the first block calculus class. We understand that's a part of it. That's a part of what happens. There's no way you're going to stop that. What has to happen for students, the advice I would give students, especially when it comes to English, is you've got to build your reading stamina. And the only way you build your reading stamina is by reading things that are tough to read. So when that teacher gives you the allegory of a cave and you have to pick that thing apart, which is one of the hardest pieces I ever gave students to teach, going through the exercise, as difficult as it is, when you guys have Scarlet Letter, if you're reading Scarlet Letter in your English class this next year, or if you have some Wadsworth or something, you have to really pick apart, really dive into that text and figure out what it says. That's the critical thing, because when you get to the tests, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to look at a complex text and figure out how to comprehend what that text is saying. Build those intellectual muscles the same way that you build the muscles you would build to run or to play football or whatever other sport you do. So building those same muscles up in your brain and the intellectual muscles is critical. Again, not about a class necessarily beyond Algebra 2. There it's just about, I call it habits of the mind. Developing habits of the mind so that when you read a passage, you learn how to make meaning out of that passage for yourself. That's going to translate into doing well on the actual test.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bobby. All right, so on the topic of the PSAT, so when is that taken and does it help at all in the overall admission process? And how does someone prepare for that?
So the PSAT counts, the time that it's the one that it counts is the PSAT you take in October of your junior year. It helps in college admissions if you qualify as a National Merit semifinalist. It can help a little bit if you qualify as a National Merit Commended Scholar. Can break down what that is. National Merit Commended is the top 3% in the nation. So last year, I think it's 1.7 million or 1.5 million students took the PSAT. So let's say it's 1.5 million students took the PSAT, then 3%. So they find the 45,000th student. What did that student score? And then that's the cutoff score. And everyone who got that score and above makes National Merit Commended. National Merit semifinalist is very similar. It's the top 1%, but it's allotted by state. So the score is going to change depending on what state you're in. The National Merit Commended cutoff last year, just to make things slightly more difficult, your PSAT score is a 4-digit number. It's out of 760, whatever you scored on the reading, writing, and the math added together to give you a hopefully a 4-digit number. You might have made a 3-digit number. That's okay. But a 4-digit number on that. Then you can convert that 4-digit number into the 3-digit number. That is your National Merit Selection Index. There's a way to do that. But that National Merit Selection Index cutoff, also, if you just look at your PSAT report on page 3, it's going to tell you what your NMSI was. It'll be a 189 or a 205 or whatever it is. The National Merit Commended cutoff last year was a 207, and the National Merit Semifinalist and it's a 207. I believe it's a 207 again for this year. So class of 2023 students who took the PSAT last October, I think the National Merit Committed cutoff again this year is a 207, but I need to check that. We won't know the National Merit semifinalist cutoff until usually the first week of September. The cutoff in Texas last year was a 220. So to get that, to turn that 220 back into the 4-digit score, to get a 220 index score, you had to score at least a 1470 out of 1520 composite score. So your composite score had to be 1470 out of 1520 with a minimum 730 reading and writing score. The way that score converts, the reading and writing counts twice, the math counts once. So when you convert it, every time your math score goes, every time your reading and writing score goes down a point, your math score has to go up 2 points. That test caps out at a 760, which means the lowest possible reading and writing score you can make and still make National Merit semifinalist was a 720. And if you made a 720, you had to have a perfect math score. You might need a 760 out of 760. And so that would have worked. So it's pretty tricky, but that's when it matters. And you don't find out about that. We don't find out the cutoffs for National Merit semifinalists until fall of the student's senior year. Is when those cutoffs come out. Other ways it can matter though, and this is pretty critical. One is that there are some other regional awards. There is an achievement award. I think there's an Hispanic award. And then oddly, I still haven't figured out quite why this is, but Southlake qualifies for a rural and something else award, but it's a rural community award. Students who score above a certain level, it's like a 1300, 1250, will qualify for that rural award. Does that help in college admissions? Probably not. But it is a line item you can put on the resume. It does help you. It is something you've achieved. It's something to be proud of, because you think about a 1300 on the PSAT, that's like a 90th percentile score. So you're in the top 10% in the country if you're at that level. So that's something that's definitely an achievement. Will that line item, and in fact, does National Merit semifinalist particularly help for college admissions? That line item itself probably doesn't, because they're more concerned about what you made on the SAT than they are on any PSAT.
All right, thank you. How many times should one take a SAT or ACT test? Is there an optimum number?
I don't know that there's an optimum number. There's a lot of people who say after 3 times, you've probably maxed out your score. I don't know. I've known students who took it 6 or 7 times and saw improvement every time. My thing is, there's so many tests that are officially released tests that you can go find on the SAT subreddit. And you can go look on that SAT subreddit and find officially released tests on there. You could take a ton of tests with a scale score and really have an idea and then minimize it. There are a couple of schools, supposedly Stanford and Georgetown, that require you to submit every test, every official test you ever took. So in those situations, it can look bad if you're taking the test multiple times. If you got to a 1540 on your 7th attempt, but you started at an 1100, you might not be the student that Stanford's really looking for. Stanford's looking for that student who takes the test once and breaks a 1520. So that's with that in mind, but you can take it as many times. There is no cap to the number of times you can take it, no official cap. I would say we had a student this last year that I was working with who got to about a 1420, 40 score. And so he decided to try the ACT. So we did some practice tests, did some tutoring, and he ended up with a 35 ACT. So again, you could do one and kind of find yourself plateauing someplace with one, convert to the other and see if that makes a difference. If just whatever because you've got this, the newness of the test strikes you right. And it's also a matter of having, we had another client this year who all of her practice tests, she was kind of in the mid 1300s, but we knew she could do better. We knew like it was kind of her last test. She had a 1510. The test, when we went over the test, the topics on that test were all in her wheelhouse, and she nailed it, every one of them, and made a 1510 on it. So sometimes it's about that too. Schools are going to look at your scores one of three ways. Most schools are going to let you super score. So I heard from a student today who got her ACT back, and her ACT was up another 2 points to a 27, but then her super score was a 28. What super scoring does is you can take the best scores from different sections and combine those to create a super score. Most schools, something like 80% of schools, will let you super score. Now, those aren't the traditionally selective universities, but a few schools, Texas A&M, University of Texas, want to see your one-time best test, your single sitting best test that you did. Again, you can take the test as many times as you want, but they want to know that one where you just crushed it. What was that one sitting that was the best? Then the third option is the one I already mentioned, the Georgetown, Stanford kind of option that they want to see. They don't care how many times, they just want to see every time you took it. So you have to submit to them your entire test history when you do apply to those schools. Those are very, very few though. There are not many schools that are requiring that. Again, most schools let you apply your test scores in a way that is advantageous to your application rather than having to do otherwise.
There's a quick follow-up from one of the participants. When is the better time to take SAT, October or December? Can we take in October and repeat in December?
That's actually the recommended system that I do now. There's some students that have problems with doing that. One of the caveats I had on one of the slides was about thinking about your extracurricular activities. So if you're in marching band, right? Well, if you're in marching band this year, you are not taking a test until the spring, because even if you already finished Algebra 2, the October SAT is the same weekend as if you're marching band at Carroll, I should say. I don't know if everybody's at Carroll, but there's a Band of America's contest the first week in October. There always is. And then this year, the marching band's going to Grand Nationals the week after the November SAT. So the marching band students that I'm working with, we're just concentrating on the PSAT in the spring, and we're in the fall, and we're going to worry about the SAT in the spring. We're not going to worry about the SAT this fall, because with marching band, there's just no way to put in the practice tests and those kind of things that you need to do leading up to that October, because you can't take the October SAT. I don't love taking the November SAT and then on Monday leaving for Grand Nationals. I think your focus might be elsewhere, and then you're out for Grand Nationals for a week and come back and take the December SAT. I don't love that. The question, though, the reason I love this question, it says, is there a better time to take the SAT in October or December? One of the other pieces of misinformation that's out there that I've heard from students is there are some school day tests. So in October 12th this year, if a senior has not taken the SAT, they'll be able to take the SAT for free. Next March, if a junior has not taken the SAT, they'll be able to take the test for free. And one of the things a student said to me is, well, everyone knows, I loved it, everyone knows that March SAT is easier. That is complete baloney. That doesn't happen. So the question is there a better time to take the October or the December test? The best time to take the test is whenever you have 8 weeks leading up to the test to focus your preparation time. When you have that time to focus preparation, that's the best test to take. There is no such thing. I just talked about the young lady who that May SAT just hit her in her wheelhouse. But that test wasn't easier. That test wasn't any different. And in fact, College Board works really, really hard. It costs $2 million to produce a single form of that test. Their R&D process, their developmental process is $2 million worth of investment creating a single test. Part of that is because they are going to spend time trying to make certain that a student who gets a 1520 on the October test, that 1520 indicates the exact same things that a 1520 in November and December and March would. The concept is called equating, and they have a really detailed process. You'll notice when you get your SAT scores back, a lot of times, it'll say you made a 1460, but it'll also say that your range of scores is maybe 40 points above and 40 points below that 1460. So, maybe you could have made a 1500 on that test, because that's the variance between tests. That's just kind of what happens in a high to low. So the answer is, which one's the best one to take? The best one to take is the one that you have the time to prepare for ahead of time, that you can prepare right up to the exact test date. But just this idea that one test is always easier than the others. One of the other myths that I've heard is you should go take the test at a Title I school. You should find a school that has a really high population of low SES, because everyone knows they give easier tests to the Title I schools. No, they don't. They give the same test to the Title I schools. They take the exact same test. And on the December, March, and May SATs, everyone in the country is taking the same test. It's a little bit different the other 4 tests of the year, but on that particular date, everyone's taking the exact same test across the country. So it doesn't make any difference.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Bybee. I think that another question we had was what would you recommend a student do by themselves to maximize their score if they cannot attend a prep course, whether it may be financial or a lot of extracurricular activities going on outside of school? So those kids who don't really have all that free time, like you said, that 8 weeks open leading up to the test, what could they do?
So there are tons of the places where the hardworking, grinding student can get some extra help. This is one. Khan Academy is fantastic. You can go into Khan Academy and you can actually sign into College Board. If you've ever taken a PSAT, it is going to, it's taking me a second, there's catching up. It's going to ask your permission to import those PSAT results here. Once it imports it, it's going to diagnose exactly the concepts that you need to focus on. Now, if you're a student in class of 2025 and you've not taken a PSAT yet, what can you do? Well, let me see if I can back this up. It's not backing up for me. In that situation, they have short diagnostic quizzes available. Right here, it says, take the diagnostic quizzes right there. And so you can take diagnostic quizzes. Once you've either imported your test scores or taken the diagnostic quizzes, it will tell you exactly what math concepts you need to focus on. It's going to rate you at a skill level 1 to 4. And you can go down and you can look and say, hey, you know what? It says I'm a skill level 1 on manipulating quadratic and exponential expressions. So I'm going to go do some practice on that. You can review if you want to review, or you can just dive into the skills practice. And when you look here, you have this parabola. Here's the question. What am I going to answer for that question? You'll notice down here, it asks, do you have 5 questions? When you get 5 questions in a row correct, it's going to move you up a skill level. So Khan Academy is fantastic. The difficulty about Khan Academy, just like with what I said earlier about learning how to apply what you know to the test, is the questions are not worded in a way as the same as the SAT. They're not telling you what words you can actually look for, but they are helping you learn the concepts. And even inside of that, there's video hints. There are just straight up hints. And so Khan Academy is a fantastic free resource. Another one is on Reddit. This is dangerous. I'm going to open up Reddit real quick. On Reddit, you can go to the Reddit, the SAT, ACT subreddits. Let me see if I can find them here, if I'm even logged in anymore. I haven't been on Reddit in forever. There it is, SAT, ACT subreddit right there. So you can go to the subreddit on SAT, and they have on the subreddit, there's discussions on here. There's all kinds of things that you can use, but right over here under the free, they have a list of 20 practice tests. You can go to that link and you can open up released practice tests on the SAT. You can find the links to those. There's tons of practice tests you can use on Reddit. The other thing you can do with using Reddit is if you get stuck on a question, if you don't understand what made a right answer right or a wrong answer wrong, take a picture of it and post it a question. And in minutes, you will have an explanation as to what made your answer right, what made the wrong answer wrong, or vice versa, made your answer wrong, made the right answer right. That's a fantastic thing you can do with Reddit. Also on Reddit, there are two other really great resources that do cost a little bit, but they're not very expensive at all. One is called College Panda. College Panda's workbooks are actually, I'm going to talk about two particular books, but College Panda's books are definitely more difficult than the SAT. So if you're doing College Panda's work and you're crushing that, you're going to crush the SAT. So you can do College Panda. As far as reading and writing, the best stuff out there on reading and writing is by Erica Meltzer. I think it's Meltzer, but I may be misspelling that last name slightly. Fantastic stuff on the reading and writing sections. And then I'll make a plug for a book some friends of mine have put out. It's on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon, but it is just called the No BS SAT Math, I think is the title of it. There it is. This black book right here, No BS SAT Math. Josh and Jackie are friends of mine. This book is amazingly successful. Josh and Jackie are online tutors, both graduated from NYU, and they're available. They tutor out of Long Island online, but they put together this math book. So that's another very low cost. So that's not going to be free, right? College Panda, Erica's books, Josh and Jackie's books, all of those are going to be cut, but they're not super expensive. So at a very low rate. And Josh and Jackie's book really does start you from the most basic concepts all the way up through the most difficult concepts. Another one, which is also not free, but is very reliable, is a program called 1600.io. And 1600.io has put together a program, some of which is free, where they will break down all the practice tests. They will do all kinds of things. So they have a lot of different videos on here where you can access it. So again, I told you like 8 weeks, right? Well, if they have $19.99 a month, they have a 40 course bundle here. You can do that. There's programs on 1600.io that they have really good videos, really good things you do. YouTube has, if you ever get stuck on a question that's from a release test, if you'll type it into YouTube, it will give you information back on you'll find a video out there most of the time, especially if it's anything out of the blue book or the red book. You'll find a video online that breaks down how to solve that question just on YouTube. So if you're a grinder, if you're able to put that time in on your own, you do not have to pay anyone a penny. Between the SAT, ACT subreddits and YouTube alone, you can get every bit of support you need to hit a 1550, a 35 on the ACT, without a question, without a doubt.
Okay. Next question is related to the essays that we write for college applications. Why are essays important for college applications, and what does the admissions office look for? Is there any kind of help available for writing essays?
So the essays for your very selective schools, back up, for every school, the essay is the one opportunity that you as a student get to speak for yourself, to tell them who you are, to tell them what you're interested in doing. That's your one opportunity. Some of the essays, as to how college admissions use them, in some cases, they're using the essays to gauge how likely you are to enroll at this school, particularly the selective universities. A university that has a why us prompt. Why do you want to go to our school? What are the programs you're hoping to pursue? School. They're looking how thoughtful you've been about how you're going to do how are you going to benefit from a specific program, and how will that specific program benefit from having you be a part of it? They are not looking for how well you read what it said about that program on the website, and how much you can reiterate what that program said or what that website said about it. So that's one of the ways they're looking for it. The essays are a tricky animal because different schools are going to handle them different ways. When you have a school like a Texas A&M, Texas A&M had 50,000 applicants last year, accepted about 20,000 of them, and had about 11,000 of the students they accepted enroll. Do I think they read every essay of every one of the 20,000 students who they accepted? I think it's doubtful. That they require like 3 essays. I think it's highly doubtful that they read 60,000 essays between August 1st when applications opened and February 1st when the last decision went out. The time of man hours that would take. But the story about the essay is an essay can heal the sick, it won't raise the dead. If an admissions officer is on the fence about your application, especially at a selective school, the essay can be the thing that tilts them in your favor or tilts them against you. So do I think they read every essay? No. Do I think you need to write the essay as if it's going to be read? Absolutely. You have to write the very best essay you're capable of. The essays are a little different. These are not I've always dreamed of being a doctor because when my grandfather was sick and the doctors talked to me about it, it made me dream of one day curing cancer. That's a compelling story. The story about essays is that there are no bad topics. There's just bad essays. So I've had students who told that story and got into their first choice schools, but I've also had students who told that story and did not get accepted to their 5th choice school. They got denied at several schools. It's difficult to predict which schools are going to read the essays. I don't think the schools are going to read all the essays, but you want to make certain that if they choose to read your essay, they have a fantastic essay. So I'll go back to some resources. We do run a program. Some people sitting on the panel tonight could talk about the program that we have. That's a week-long program to help students with the essays. I go into schools and I do a free 2 or 3 hour workshop on the essays and how to write an effective essay and kind of walk them through that. I'm typing a URL in here real quick that I'll share with you. The national authority on essays is a guy out of California who has branded himself predictably the college essay guy. And you can go to Ethan's website. And here at the college essay guy, Ethan has all kinds of, join my live college essay application course this summer. So he's offering a course. It's already started. It's almost over. But you can work through here. You can really talk about, he has tons of free resources about how to write the essays. He's talked about every kind of prompt. If you go into Ethan's website and you search a topic, you will find him. He will have in his website a place that talks about that particular topic. So really good resource that's, again, free. Ethan's put Ethan has I don't know if he still does it. He had a really unusual pricing model for a while where you paid him what you thought he deserved, like kind of models. He's done some really interesting things, innovative things. But how to write, here's a video course that you could take. How to write the college application and supplementary essays, just a video course that you can do. Different video courses that are out there for counselors. He's got some books about how to write the essays. So really good source, collegeessayguy.com. And I don't want to use this forum to plug my own program, but that's some free ones that are out there. There's plenty of people out there willing to help you write your college essays.
Thank you, Mr. Bybee. All right, so next question. So how do students pick which college they should apply to? Specifically kids who are undecided on their career choices. What are some qualities and things people should look for when choosing which college to apply to? And for kids who like to take tours of college campuses and stuff, what are some questions that they should ask the representatives?
All right. A lot of things to unfold with that question. I'll start with choosing a college. And this has been somewhat controversial recently for some parents, because I get there's some things about, if you do graduate from Rice, it's hard to say that there's a bad job waiting for you once you graduate from Rice, right? Everyone who graduates from Rice is going to get a good job. Everyone who graduates from Harvard is going to get a good job. It's hard to deny. But there's a lot of data out there that tells us that you are actually much better off for your long-term career prospects to find a school where you can match up in the top third of the students who are at that school. I think it's because if you're in that top third, you're going to get more leadership, more internship, more research opportunities than if you were in the bottom third. You're going to have a better chance to connect with professors. And if you're at a university that's doing any kind of research at all, there are going to be professors on your campus doing research that's connected to people that they're going to be able to help you with it. So I've had students who went to UTD and their first job out of college was at Amazon. I had a student just a couple of weeks ago, I saw on LinkedIn, he posted that he's left his job at Google as a software engineer and headed over to Amazon to work on a project at Amazon as a software engineer who graduated from the University of Oklahoma. I would say the University of Oklahoma probably isn't super well known for its software engineering program. It's not what people go there for necessarily, but because of the work he was able to do there, he did fine. I have another student that on my podcast that I talked to who applied to Michigan, MIT, and UT when he graduated from high school. And he wanted to study computer science. He was denied at Michigan and MIT, accepted at UT. At UT, he became a part of the Computer Science Honors College. And when he graduated from UT, while he was there, he worked with Google on an algorithm that was decoding encrypted files. And he's been able to take that and parlay it into a PhD program at MIT. Now that's going from the University of Texas, Austin to MIT, flagship state university to extremely selective university for a PhD. The thing I know from experience, from having worked with thousands of students and the kind of 30,000 foot view that I have on careers, it's not nearly as important where you go as what you do when you get there. So where are you going to go that's going to give you the opportunities to get into student leadership, to get involved in organizations, to do those kind of things that you're going to have the chance to do that you wouldn't have other places. So when I start looking at colleges, one of the sources it's hard to know that, right? So one of the sources that I recommend to parents a lot of times, if your high school has Naviance is an absolutely fantastic resource to dig into GPAs. The scattergrams on there can be informative. You can dig into a lot of that. Another great website that's free is the College Navigator. So you can type College Navigator into any search engine and it's going to come up. This site is supported by the Department of Education. And so it's the information that universities have to turn into them. But if we go look at a school like, let me go Georgia Tech. I was looking at Georgia Tech earlier today for someone. We can go look at Georgia Tech. And if you want to find out, it's hard to know with grades, how you're going to fit in overall, but you can make some reasonable assumptions based on SAT scores. And if we look at admissions right here on Georgia Tech, I'm going to blow this up just a little, make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. So if I look at admissions right here, I can see that the students admitted in the fall of 21, they had an average SAT score. The reading and writing, the midpoint on the reading and writing was about a 680, and the math was about a 730. So if you were 680, 730 on reading and writing, you were competitive at Georgia Tech. You were going to be halfway or better in the top half of SAT scores there. ACT composite around a 32, and the English needed to be about a 32 as well. Math 32, 33. So about 31, 32. I'm sorry, 32-ish on the math. So you can see some things inside of the data. If you don't have Naviance, the other magical thing, if you really want to find out, to dig into data about a school and really find out the academic nature, if you type in the name of any university and then those 3 magic words you're seeing pop up right here on my search bar, common data set, the name of a university and those 3 words. Common data set is tricky. Not a common data set is completely voluntary. Not every school is going to put their common data set out there. They don't all have it. The other crazy thing about the common data set, so this is Texas A&M. You'll notice this website, look at that URL. That is not exactly a forward-facing, easy to navigate URL. So doing a search engine, and if you start looking at it, the common data set is actually about halfway down the page finally. But here I can go look at the PDF for, is that coming up for you, Wissam?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, cool. You can look at the PDF here for, let me know if something doesn't show up, for their common data set. And you can look at page number 7. We'll tell you first time, first year freshman. This is Texas A&M. Common data set for 21-22 school year. So these are the students who were admitted in the fall of 21, who were starting school in the fall of 21. That year, they had 43,000 total applications. They accepted about 28,000. Look at that, 48,000. Texas A&M, 48,000 accepted, 28,000, had 12,000 actually enroll. So they have a freshman class of 12,000 students. And then you can dig down and you can say, okay, it has more information about what classes are required, that kind of thing. How does the school, what's most important in the admissions to that particular school, the relative importance of the academic factors. You can dig that around, but here's the best part. When you start looking at your SAT and ACT scores, here in section C9, the freshman profile, you can see that at Texas A&M, the average SAT score was between a 1160 and a 1370. And then you can see what the reading and the writing score, what the ACT score was. That all breaks down for you right here. So you can figure that out. Even better, look at this. You can see that 46%, actually 64%, almost 2/3 of Texas A&M's students that year had a 600 or above reading, and another 64% a 600 or above math. So you get a really good idea that once you walk onto campus there, how are you going to compare? At 1,200, 65% of the students had a 1,200 or above. You can also see that now not every school is going to do GPA because there's a lot of different GPA scales out there. But you can also look here that 60% of Texas A&M's incoming freshman class, 60% were in the top 10th of their high school. 98% were in the top half. So 29% were in, or 89% total were in the top quarter. So if you were not in the top quarter of your high school, and I know if you're at a high school like a Carroll High School or a Carroll Senior High or a Keller High School, where it's much more competitive to be in the top quartile at those schools than it is at a lot of schools, that can be a factor. But if you weren't in the top quartile, you have to know that going in. Like, what are you going to have to do to get yourself into that, to be in that top half of the students? How competitive is that going to be? And are you better off then to be thinking about another school that's another, big research university where you could be more competitive? So you could take your 1280 at A&M, which puts you in the, and your second quartile, which puts you, in the second half of A&M probably. But you could take that to Texas Tech and be a rock star at Texas Tech. Which is going to be the right place for you? Take that to University of Houston and be a rock star at University of Houston. Those are major tier 1 research institutions where you would have tons of opportunity to participate in things that you might not get a chance to at a Texas A&M or a UT Austin. So that's things, when I talk about thinking about what to choose, that's what I'm looking at. Like, how do you look at those aspects of it? Okay. That was a part of it. there's a lot to unpack in that question. Can you back to what the other parts I didn't cover were?
Yeah, actually you covered everything pretty good. So what would be like some good questions to ask representatives during campus tours? And
That's the other part of it. Thank you. Yep.
you go to Carroll High School, if anyone's ever at the senior high building, throughout the year, they bring in representatives from other schools and stuff to come set up. So what would be some good questions to ask them?
So when that representative is there, I mean, one of the things you need to know going in is what are you looking for in the school? And I want to be sure to stress to you. So there's a college fair at Carroll Senior High that happens. It's in October, right around the PSAT time in the evening. They have something like 120 colleges there. It's what you're asking, that person standing at that table is actually kind of the gatekeeper. They're going to have a lot of, if they've got a good relationship with you, they're going to be able to let the university know that they've engaged with you quite a bit and they think you're very interested in coming to their school. The title for a lot of those people is no longer admissions officer, it's now recruitment officer. Think about the difference in that. The admissions office is kind of a passive thing. We're going to accept the applications that come to us and we're going to go through those. A recruitment officer's job is to go out and really find those applicants that they want to have at their school. So a lot of your universities have turned to having recruitment officers instead of admissions officers. That's that person sitting at that table. You want to find out what are the things you're looking for in a campus. Do you want a big campus with lots of school spirit and they have great tailgating on Saturdays and those, you want that part of it? Are you looking for a smaller school that's going to give you a chance to have smaller classes? Please understand that that person standing at that table, whether it's in the student activity center or at the college fair, that person's job is definitely to get you to apply. Their job is to get applicants in the door so they have a better selection of students. They have a better idea of who they're going to bring into the school. That's really critical to them. At that table, I don't know that there are a lot of questions necessarily to ask that are going to signal anything to the university, but I would say when you go on college tours, there are some things you should be watching for. Part of it is, how do you see yourself at that school? Where do you see yourself being a part of it? Other things you might want to ask yourself as you're walking around on a college tour, is this a school where everyone is wearing a school shirt? Or is it a school where no one is wearing any kind of school clothing? Like you wouldn't know you were on a campus. You could be on a business campus. And then whatever your answer is to that, which one do you want? Do you want a place that gets crazy about the school, or do you want a place that's pretty low key about the school? Another thing to watch for is, how are the students interacting with each other? How are they interacting with professors, if you can see that on campus? Do you see a lot of student groups and they're doing things together or do you see a lot of students on their earbuds off by themselves reading books? Like what's that collegiality like? And then what's that like for you? How important is that for you? Recently, I've been doing a lot of looking at the big flagship universities and just breaking down their class sizes, because your flagship universities, over half of the classes that they offer oftentimes have 40 or more students in them. A lot of times they have a quarter of the classes have 50 or more students in them. So when you're walking, is that something you want? Do you want, what percentage of your classes? Because they're going to tell you all about class size. Oh, our Austin College, our student teacher ratio, our professor student ratio is 8-1 at Austin College. But that's great. What percentage of your classes are 8-1 versus what percentage are 100-1? Because there are classes out there that are 100-1, and you have to, and then back to, what are you looking for? Do you want a place where you can be relatively anonymous? You can get involved in the activities you want to get involved in, or do you want to go to a place that everyone's going to be tied in with each other? What are you looking for in a school? And then how do you ask questions that help you figure out, is that what that school offers? But again, keep in mind that admissions officer standing at that table, their job is really trying to get those application numbers up. They're a recruitment officer. They're trying to find good candidates, but they also want to make sure that you want to apply there.
Okay, that is very useful information. The next question is from the student community. What AP level classes would help increase your chances of getting into college for engineering or pre-med?
It's you have your standards, right? Your AP Bio, your AP Physics, Calc AB. I'd start that by saying that your very selective universities, like your University of Texas at Austin, has said that if in order for a student to get into business, engineering, or economics, they want to see that the student is calculus ready. Now, they've not clarified exactly what calculus ready means. The most obvious way to signal that is if you completed Calc AB while you were in high school. The other things I would say is it's not so much which AP classes you took as it is how many AP classes you took. University of Georgia is a great example. University of Southern California also. On average, students who were accepted to those schools took 8 AP classes in high school, and the range is about 5 to 11 of the number of AP classes they took on average. Your very selective schools, your Ivy Plus schools, the average is 11. So when you start talking about taking 11 AP classes, obviously you've got, APUSH, AP Lang & Comp, AP Lit, AP Euro, or World, either one. So those are kind of the standards. Then you get into your, okay, did I do AP Calc AB? Did I do AP Physics, AP Spanish, things like that. So which classes, once you're getting into those, like now how do you add on to that, right? Well, now that's where your APES comes in, or your AP Gov and Econ, or that's where you get those extra classes coming in. You're going to have to take some, there's some AP classes in there that you may not take, that you may take that, if your choice is AP Bio or AP Environmental Science, I say go with AP Bio. It's a more difficult test. It's a more respected test. If your choice is AP Psychology or AP US History, I would go with AP US History, again, for the same reasons. But then you have your AP Art History class, which is one of the toughest classes out there. It's a fantastic class. So looking at that, I don't know necessarily, you have your standards, but the question then comes down to if you want to study engineering or pre-med, or go on to study something that's for pre-med. In those situations, it's really about, did you take the math that you need to take? Did you take the science classes? What have they seen? University of Texas has really pushed this concept of fit to major. What do they see in your resume? What do they see on your transcript that makes it look like that major is a good major for you? What are they seeing out of those elements? That's going to be a bigger factor than really which AP classes you took, because everyone is pretty much going to take, Lang & Comp, Lit & Comp, World, US History. Those classes are all going to be the same. I will say this, and this is not a knock on the schools, but this idea of there being an engineering pathway and there being a pre-med pathway, that's relatively meaningless to the colleges themselves in and of itself, separate from the classes that you took. But if you are applying to a University of Texas, very selective engineering department, if you're applying to a Kelley School of Business at University of Indiana, very selective school of business, right? Then you want to be able to show in your application what are things you did that help you stand out in those fields. One other thing I'll say, and this is a more controversial thing to talk about, I think, but when college admissions officers are looking at the admissions profile, if any of you have ever sat with me in a consultation, I bring this up constantly. Before they ever open an application, they've kind of sorted the applications into 3 categories. And there's 2 categories that have hooks to them. They have something about that application that's going to make that application stand out. It's going to hook the person's interest. Over here, we have the hooks are you an athlete, or can you be in the marching band? Are they looking for tuba players from Montana this year? And are you a tuba player from Montana? So that's going to be a group: athletes, legacy applicants, developmental applicants. Can your family build a wing on the library? And then children of faculty is a smaller group in there. But that group, that ALDC group, is going to get in at a much higher rate. Athletes are going to get in at like a 90% rate, right? Because they're going to know the recruiting coach is going to have told them, I need your score to be at this. They're going to have pre-screened that application with the admissions office to say, can this candidate get in? So that group's getting in at a very high rate. Over here, and it's about 30%. So if you had a school that had a 10% acceptance rate, well, 3 of those 10 percentage points were gone before they ever opened an application. Over here, you have another roughly 30% group. And this group is made up of first generation college students, traditionally underrepresented minorities, and then international students. And the international students is kind of the controversial one. I looked over the class of 2025 class profiles for 18 selective universities last year. They were all 11 to 13% international students coming in for their freshman class. Now, how this group overlaps with this group is really tough to gauge, right? Because you may have Brazilian students that are international students who are on the men's soccer team. That's going to happen as well, but there's going to be overlap. But we can safely say that maybe 30%-ish of this group is going to get in as well. So if you're not in one of these two groups, right, and the school has a 10% acceptance rate, then this middle group of 4%, 4 points left for this group is standing out. One of the things you have to do, and I'm talking about a Duke, an Emory, a Vanderbilt, something like that. Those schools, one of the ways they're sorting through those unhooked students is to look at, did they take a 4th year of a foreign language? And it really is, did you take that 4th year? So if you want to, and I have conversations with students regularly where I'll say, I did Spanish 3, I'm done. And they'll have Vanderbilt on their list. And I'm like, well, do you want to go to Vanderbilt? Well, yeah, then you need Spanish 4. So they have to make a choice. Do I want to go to Vanderbilt? Do I want to take Spanish 4? Which of those two? Because they're mutually exclusive. That's not to say that students who get into Vanderbilt will not have taken a 3rd year of a foreign language. You saw on that common data set for A&M, it's entirely Stanford, by the way. Stanford's common data set, they don't require any classes technically on their common data set. Everything is recommended, and everything is recommended at 3 years. Okay, but do you think you're getting into Stanford if you only took 3 years of language? If you had the chance to take AP Lit and Comp and you passed on that your senior year of high school, Stanford's not interested in that student who decided, I'm going to take it easy my senior year. So they're gonna bypass that application. 4 years of the same foreign language is critical for a way. It's a critical way you can make certain you stay in the yes pile. Getting into a really selective university, the most important thing is staying out of the no pile. And the longer you can do that, the more reasons you give them to reasons you avoid giving them to say no, the better off you're going to be.
Okay. There's a related question from the participants. How relevant are AP exam scores?
For the actual admissions, they're not relevant. The university is never going to know your score unless you tell them your score. We do a thing called a college resume, and we tell students that if you have a 4 or a 5, you want to put that on your resume. But again, colleges probably aren't going to see your resume. They are more interested in, did you take the AP class, than how did you score on the actual test. Now, that said, if you look at a school like a Texas A&M or a University of Texas, University of North Texas, those schools are incredibly generous for giving you credit for 3s and above on AP exams. So getting in for admissions at those schools, the test scores are not going to be a huge factor. Getting credit, if you're going to, because then if you could rack up 20 hours of credit at Texas A&M, 21 hours of credit at Texas A&M, well, one, that saves your family about $8,000, almost $9,000 in just tuition alone. But 2, it puts you in a position to take fewer hours per semester or even graduate early if that's what you opted to do. The scores themselves, will schools see if you made a 4 or a 5 or a 2 or a 3? The school is only going to know about the scores if you tell them. There is no place in the application where you're required to tell them what you scored on that particular test.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vibey.
You're welcome.
So kind of on the topic of, because you did mention like some extracurricular activities and stuff. But outside of, actual academics and numbers and test scores, what are some outside influences that can help your application? So does Carroll ISD's reputation affect your chances of getting accepted at any point? If does the number of extracurricular activities you're involved in make a difference on your application? So what are some of those kind of outside influences that can help your application?
Schools are not as interested in your extracurricular activities because they're looking for you to repeat those same extracurricular activities when you get to the school. Universities want to see that you were involved in extracurricular activities in order for them to gauge, because they know getting you to stay at that university is a matter of you becoming a part of the community and feeling like you're a part of the community. If in high school, you were not involved in very much and you just kind of sat back and did whatever small things you did, you didn't leave a footprint, then the likelihood of you leaving a footprint when you get to college is very low because you haven't built those skills. And it's going to be much easier for you to stay in your dorm room and maybe not get connected with the community like you need to in order to be back the next year. So which extracurricular activities in particular that you do are not nearly as important as the fact that whatever you choose to do, you leave a footprint. You make a mark, you become, your freshman year, you're a member, your sophomore year, you take on some responsibility so that your junior year, you're working yourself into leadership. And by your senior year, you're being elected a leader for that organization. That's much more important. Now, there are some things you could do if you were, if you said you wanted to be, I didn't mention this earlier, but the idea of being pre-med is not so much a major that you're going to do, although some schools do have a pre-med track, as much as it is you're taking classes like biology classes and scientific classes that are going to lead that you're not going to have to repeat when you get accepted to medical school. If you're saying you want to go to, you want to be in that track, you want to be competitive for that, then what did you do in high school? Were you participating in some kind of research that was published? I've had students that in high school were published as a part of a research program for UT Arlington. Like, what organizations have you been involved in that you've been able to participate in that you can discuss, you can actually show that you made a difference for. So if there's research opportunities, shadowing and things like that are great to get experience, to help that's something you want to do and maybe give you something to write about in your essays. But where were you able to make a difference? What were the things you were able to be in? If you want to go mechanical engineering, the robotics team is a fantastic team to be in. If you want to go, the rocket team is a fantastic thing to be a part of. If you're saying you want to study computer science, well, the college is going to know if AP Comp Sci was offered at your school, because the school profile is going to tell them that AP Comp Sci was offered at your school. If you didn't study AP Comp Sci, how do you know you want to study computer science? And when you get to college, well, make a lot of money. Well, that's not really a good reason to pursue that. So what are you doing? What are you involved in high school that does align with the major? And here's the other thing. If you don't know what you want to major in, we've got 40-something people sitting in here. If you're a 16-year-old who has no clue what you want to major in, I want you to know right now, that's normal. Okay. You're a part of the vast majority of the students that I talk with who just don't have a really good idea. And even when I talk to a student who says, hey, I want to major in engineering, or I want to major in business, if I press and I'm like, well, do you want to do mechanical, electrical? They know that's a thing, but they may not really know what that is. If I press and say, do you want to study finance? Do you want to do marketing? They start thinking they don't realize that it goes one level past just that thing. Someone has told you, hey, you're good at math, you should do engineering. And so that's become kind of the thing, but really diving into it. So I don't want anyone listening to this thinking that everyone else has everything planned out and you don't. The reality is, because I'm on the other side of that, the reality is most 16-year-olds, most 17-year-olds don't have that all planned out yet. And so that's okay too. The University of Texas, which has this big fit to major thing where they're saying, hey, we realize that most 18-year-olds don't know what they want to do, but we want the 18-year-olds who do. Well, that's very different than Texas Tech, which has said, hey, we know that most 18-year-olds don't really know if they want to be engineers or not. So we're going to create this program called our Explore program that's going to give them a year to go explore that. Trinity University down in San Antonio is going to come up with a program that says, hey, we understand that it takes a year for you to really figure out everything a college has to offer. Let's get you down here and give you a year to figure that out before you really have to commit to a major. Know that going in, that there are plenty of schools out there where you don't, I want to say, I think it's Brown that even does something similar to that. There's an Ivy that does something similar to that. That cool that you've declared a major, but they understand that that's going to change. And so they're going to make certain that the classes you take as a freshman aren't really going to matter for your actual major, that they're going to have a course of study for you that gives you a place where you can get a year under your belt before you do that. Again, what was that question to start with, though? I want to make sure I got to all of it.
Oh yeah, no, you answered that one.
Thanks for keeping me on track, man.
Yeah,
I get going and I kind of,
you that was great. I think that pretty much covered everything the question was asking. All right, thank you so much, Mr. Bobby, for taking time out of your day to come speak with us and talk to us about this. It's a really important topic, and I'm sure everyone who attended the session benefited greatly from it. So thank you so much.
you're welcome.
If Southlake Foundation people have any other That's not okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Bybee.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very
That
much.
was a lot of talking. Thank you very much.
It was a lot of talking. I apologize for that. I do that too
Oh,
much.
no, it was great information. I mean, we all learned a lot from you today. Thank you very much. Really.
Thank you guys for
appreciate
having me. I
being here.
appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
You guys have a great night. Have a good summer.
Good night. Bye.